Oh, I'm sorry. Can I clean here?
By now, we all know who Anatoly the Cleaner is. He goes from gyms to prove that even the lighter dudes can outlift some very big muscular dudes. And oftentimes in his videos, Anatoly refers to himself as an elite powerlifter. I'm myself a 2-time powerlifting world champion in the 66 kilo weight class, which is one of the weight classes that Anatoly competes at. I've also coached other athletes to become world champions, and today I will use my experience and my knowledge as a powerlifter in order to analyze Anatoly's deadlift and to see if he's really elite as he claims to be. We'll first see his deadlift technique, and then we'll analyze his pure strength to see if he would be up there with the best powerlifters in his weight class. Here we can see him deadlift 290 kilos. Like I said, in the second part of the video, we're going to see if in terms of strength, that's really elite. But first, looking at his technique. The first thing we can notice, and I've noticed that on a lot of his videos, is his deadlifting using lifting straps. Using lifting straps is cool, but in powerlifting, it's actually forbidden. I know that in strongman competitions, for example, it's completely fine. And I would say if you're willing to pull as much weight as you possibly can, obviously the grip is going to be a limiting factor. I know it for a fact because my grip cost me one world title last year in June at the 2024 World Championship. But here, when you're lifting in the gym, in my opinion, if you want to make the lift count, like without any doubt, you should lift it without the lifting straps. Now, if you don't really care, then obviously you can use those, but definitely the deadlift is a much harder lift to perform without the lifting straps than it is with the lifting straps. And in terms of positioning, it does also change a bit because you can actually roll the lifting straps at the end of your hands, which again makes the lift a bit easier. Now, in terms of positioning, we can see he's pulling using the sumo stance. There are a couple of advantages with the sumo stance, so you can get your hips much closer to the bar, which is why when you're watching some powerlifting competitions, most of the lifters are using the sumo because you actually have a better leverage on your hips than you would with a conventional stance. Obviously, you can find some lifters pulling conventional. I'm one of them, so I always pull conventional, but most of the time in powerlifting competitions, you'll see sumo. Like I said, the sumo is easy on its own. It's just that in terms of technique, it's a bit harder with the sumo. But if you master the technique of the sumo in terms of producing strength, it's actually a bit easier. But you know, it's harder to master, easier to perform, whatever the case may be. With the sumo, you can get your hips closer to the bar, which makes the lift more efficient. So honestly, besides that, he really has a very solid technique. So he's very upright. You can be more upright with the sumo than you would be with the conventional stance because once again, you're pushing your hips much closer to the bar, and instead of having a lot of strength to produce with your posterior chain, you have much more strength to produce with your quads because you're pushing against the floor a bit more with the sumo. We can see he's pulling the slack very well because the bar is bending significantly. So when the bar bends, when you initiate the pull, it means your slack pull is really good, and pulling the slack is a way to have better force transfer from the legs to the upper body because again, on the deadlift, you're pulling with your hands. So if you have better force transfer from the legs to the hands, you're actually scoring a lot of good points in terms of deadlift technique. And he's really steadily pushing against the floor and then locking the rep out. So honestly, on those aspects, I think Anatoly's deadlift technique is very elite. I would say in terms of pure technique, he's probably like a solid 9.5. A lot of good points on his deadlift execution. Like I said, a couple of drawbacks. The first drawback would be the lifting straps, makes the lift much easier. And second drawback, and I'll talk about it in the strength side of things, but he's using bumper plates on top of using a deadlift bar. The deadlift bar and the bumper plates make the lift much easier because as you can see, the bar is bending way more. So in terms of smoothness of the pull and also efficiency, it's much smoother and much more efficient as a lift. Those things definitely help him out have this technique because like I said, he's very upright, and the straps, the deadlift bar and the bumper plates help get this better position, being more upright, and you don't get all of those advantages using a stiff bar. Here you can see as a comparison, when I'm deadlifting on the stiff bar, there's almost no bend visible like to the naked eye. If you zoom in, obviously you can see a bit of bend, and it's the exact same weight, so it's 290, but instead of having a deadlift bar and bumper plates, it's a stiff bar with calibrated steel plates, and it makes the lift much harder. So, talking about making the lift harder. Anatoly is between two weight classes, so the 67.5 kilo weight class and the 75 kilo weight class. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the podium finishers from last year's World, so 2024, and see in that weight class how he would have scored. But in order to do so, like I said, we have to assess that the deadlift bar and the bumper plates and the straps are helping him out a lot. In my opinion, I would remove like probably a solid 20 kilos off of his deadlift max with those three elements. Maybe a bit more, because it really changes the dynamic of the lift completely. We can take one example of one of the athletes competing in the 66 kilo weight class at last year's World that actually won, and he was able to pull 297.5 kilos, which is 7.5 more than what Anatoly just pulled here. And in training, the same athlete, so with a 297.5 kilo max attempt without straps, he was able to do 5 reps with 300 kilos with straps. So as you can see, the straps are actually a huge boost depending on also your technique and other elements like that. But from 297.5 for 1 rep to 5 reps with 300 kilos, the difference is massive. So as you can see, that's why here, without any doubt, I'm removing 20 kilos to Anatoly's max. And I would say his true max is probably around 270 kilos, maybe a bit below that, but we'll take 270 as a max. So like I said, the guy who won Worlds in the 66 kilo weight class last year, he was able to do that with a 297.5 pull. The second athlete on the podium was able to do 260 kilos on his deadlift, so Anatoly would be a bit higher. And then the third athlete on the podium was your boy, finishing up on the worst place of the podium possible. So I finished third with a 285 kilo deadlift last year. So as you can see, Anatoly would actually rank pretty high in the 66 kilo weight class just on his deadlift. Again, I'm not talking about the squat or the bench where he would fall behind, but just on his deadlift, his strength is like very, very, very impressive, and he's definitely elite in terms of strength if he's a 66 kilo lifter. Like I said, he has two weight classes that he competed at, so the 67.5 and the 75 kilo. And if we take the 75 kilo weight class, which is in the IPF, the 74 kilos, on the top podium finishers, we have a 325 kilo deadlift, a 332.5 kilo deadlift, and finally a 330 kilo deadlift. So in terms of the weight class up, which I think in my opinion, he's probably much closer to the 75 kilo weight class in his deadlift training video, then he would be less elite. Is he still elite? I would say yes. In my opinion, where you're weighing in like 80 kilos and you're able to do, I would say above 250 kilos, you're definitely elite no matter what. But as you can see in the weight class up, he would be much less elite than he would be in the 66 kilo weight class. And for that reason, in terms of strength, I'm giving a solid 8 to Anatoly's deadlift. And if we add up the two scores, so I said 9, 9.5, I think I'll go with 9 because like I said, all of those elements definitely change his technique a bit. So straps, deadlift bar, bumper plates, I'd say 9 plus the 8 for strength. We're at a 17 out of 20 in terms of deadlift. And yeah, I think that makes Anatoly the cleaner, really elite as not a powerlifter, because for powerlifting, you have to be elite on the 3 lifts. So the squat, the bench, the deadlift. But just for his deadlift on its own, he's definitely elite and he's definitely up there in terms of strength. And that was it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned a couple of things. As always, if that's the case, one of the best ways to let me know is to subscribe to the channel. Almost at 50K, so I'm definitely counting on you to help this channel reach this mark. And also, if you want me to analyze somebody else on YouTube, definitely drop the names in the comments and I'll make sure to check that out and do another video. Catch you guys in the next one.